I appreciate being invited to speak again. I just come from last week's talk in Ontario, Oregon, Payette, Idaho. That sounds really loud to me. They just completed their 10th annual soil health workshop. So I was like, wow, where does a decade go? That's pretty cool. I love this quote. It comes from one of our NRCS soil health fact sheets. And the reason I liked it because it's completely different how I grew up. If you're trying to make your soil healthier, you shouldn't see it very much. Oh, brother. A complete paradigm shift how I was learned and raised, and you certainly got to hear that. You see the guy, so my talk's about cover crops today. Ken Beckman at DC in Idaho holding up the big radish and turnip. That we used to really have a fun time with the big crops. But what really makes me excited is when a guy's knowledge evolution, when he starts grazing a couple hundred head on 2 or 3 acres for a day and moves the cattle. Now that's when a smile hits my face because he's starting to prime the biological system. For 50 years or so, we've talked about cover crops at a professional level, and about the only thing we've ever gave it credit for is covering the soil to prevent erosion. But we know that many soil health innovators realize that cover crops are more than just providing cover. They're biological primers that jumpstart the revitalization of a degraded soil ecosystem. I think Rick's talk really set a good foundation for my talk, especially when you're thinking about going into new land that's, in a sense, kind of crapped out. How do you fix it? Maybe you got to revitalize that degraded soil ecosystem. The second most important biological process is nitrogen fixation. For the new tractor, are they raffling the new tractor? Yeah. What is the most important biological process if nitrogen fixation is number 2? What tractor was it, the blue one or red? Help me out. What's the number 1 biological process? Photosynthesis. Give this guy the keys to the tractor. Yeah, we can paint it. I did my master's thesis at USU on peas, and we wanted to measure the weight of the pea root, but had a hard time cleaning the soil off the root, and so we couldn't use that as an analysis. I didn't know I was working with the rhizosphere, trying to shake the rhizosphere off that root or clean it off. We just couldn't do it. That's where life is occurring, right? Through that biological process called photosynthesis, sending that liquid carbon down the plant, out the roots, to feed the soil biology. I love Christine Jones's comment, the liquid carbon pathway. I grew up on a dairy farm, and so I love this cartoon. Actually, it's a Gabe Brown cartoon. The farmer says to the vet, and suddenly this morning I noticed she didn't look so good. Well, Dad used to kick our butts quite a bit when the little Holstein calves were in that kind of condition. Well, I don't know, Dad, they're alive, but we couldn't see that. Dad could certainly see it. Well, I think on our farms and ranches, we can look at designing cover crops to help fix the starving cow, which is our starving land. We can provide crop diversity. Now one of the young lady here was a freshman in college. She was searching not for the knight in rag cloth, although that probably crossed her mind, right? She was looking for a knight in shining armor. Not a rag cloth knight. I think Rick kind of helped us see that value of that armor. It's not trash, it's not residue, it's armor. We can do many things with cover crops. We can help with pest management cycles, build organic matter, nutrient cycling, enhance pollinator and predator habitat. One of the few farmers that I've known that really does this to a high level is Brendan Rocky, right? We've had Brendan here, correct? What does Brendan put down the middle of his pivot strip? 12 foot of flowering multi-species cover crops. And that's not enough for Brendan because he's trying to get rid of the insecticide cost. So he goes around the pivot with a multi-species flowering cover crop. It's pretty impressive. Livestock integration, nitrogen fixation. Just a few resource concerns. Many of our farm systems are degraded, and we can help use one of the principles, or all the principles of soil health, but cover crops has a big umbrella that affects many of the principles of soil health. Considerations for successful cover crop planting. Site prep, early weed control is essential, especially when you're starting. If you have a little tuft of cheatgrass and winter mustards coming, you got to control those weeds. You just can't plant into them. Generally, they will beat you. Herbicide carryover is important with our multitude of herbicides we're doing. Make sure you read the labels and know what your plant back restrictions are so you don't get burnt. Timing and species. We're going to talk more about the species today, but realize if you have a warm season species, and in this country, September 5th, you're not going to get too much out of a warm season species planted, right? Seeding method, West Wide, a lot of people talk to me, they want to fly the seed on with an airplane, which is fine and dandy, but until your soil gets a little healthier, it's going to be a failure most of the time. So I really encourage guys to drill whenever technically feasible that cover crop into the soil to get that soil to seed contact. Seed size and seed depth. You heard Rick talk about his evolution going from 5 species to 8 species to 10 species to, how high did he go? Did he stop at 13? How high did he go? 20 species? Man, the guy's a lunatic, man. What's he trying to do? Regenerate that soil so fast? Yeah, that's what he's trying to do. All those species put in a seed box, plant it out, 3/4 to a half an inch, or 3/4 to an inch deep. We need to consider moisture management. I often say, well, I've only got so much water to use. But in the springtime of the year, if you've got good armor on the soil surface, you're reducing some evapotranspiration right there, some evaporation. And during the growing season, you can reduce a little bit of that if you're an irrigation system. Termination methods. Know before you plant how you're going to terminate it. Generally, the guys I work with throughout the West don't have a problem with termination because they got a 4-legged harvester. But you do need to know how you're going to terminate it. I love this comment from Jay Fuhrer, who's been at this workshop either. You know, yes, these cover crops cost you a little bit of money. The seed's not free. But with today's, so many of our ecological soil issues and resource concerns, Jay says, can we afford not to use a cover crop? I think in agriculture, one of our challenges, we want to take. We need to have a mindset of give a little back. I think there's a primary give said the little stream, something he gave wherever he went, right? Why diverse cover crop mixes? If soil health is your goal, diversity cannot be understated or ignored. I think Rick's talk was one of the best ones I've heard about the power of diversity. Yet our systems are almost monoculture. So diversity is powerful. Plants were created to grow in diverse ecosystems. I tell my young son, well, he's just starting his career. I says, man, put all your stock in Kodak camera, man. Put it all in there. What's the matter with that philosophy? There's no resiliency. There's no diversity, right? Resiliency comes from diversity. When I first started cover crops, And there's quite a few of you here that I've worked with a little bit. Man, it used to be a turnip and a pea and a radish, and we thought we had her done. Well, it didn't have very good balance. There wasn't very much carbon. After those low carbon to nitrogen ratio cover crops decomposed, the ground was bare naked. So we started learning about more diversity, building lasting cover, right? One of my paradigms, how can I say this? Working with Brad McIntyre in Idaho, like many of the guys I've worked with, this was an aha moment for me. Implementing all 5 of the principles of soil health, we measured 165 earthworms in a cubic foot of soil under irrigated ground. Boy, that was an aha moment for me. Do these 5 principles of soil health work? When you're on your hands and knees, which is in kind of a little humble situation for 30 minutes, breaking that cubic foot of soil apart, yeah, you get the sense that these 5 principles are how nature works. These are nature's principles, not Marlon Winger's principles, not NRCS's principles. These are nature's principles. That's how nature functions. We can either work with her or write checks when we work without her. Cover crop blend, just an example. The more types of seeds, the more stable the mix. Diversity builds resiliency. There's a picture of it's not my slide. We'll call it a 10-way mix. Sunflowers, peas, vetch, mustards, chickpeas, the whole gamut. I love this comment from Dr. Don Rakowski, and I think Don was here last year, and I didn't make it last year. But his comment was, look guys, no-till can get you so far to help minimize carbon loss. But until you implement the liquid carbon pathway to get more carbon into the soil ecosystem, that's the only way you can build on that carbon management. Derek Axton from Canada says he's learning the 30-minute fallow system. And I thought, what the hell? 30-minute fallow? It's because he's using the same concept as Rick. The guy planting the cover crop doesn't end for the day until he parks the planter, the drill, behind the combines. So he's trying to improve, but he's about 30 minutes behind the combine. 30-minute fallow. Questions to ask at the kitchen table. What are your goals and concerns? That was the skinny cow, right? What goals and concerns are we trying to do? What are our environmental issues that we're facing on your farm? The climate, rainfall, frost, growing season. What's the time frame? When are you going to plant these cover crops? And how much will your wife let you spend? There's a few pictures of soil erosion. Bottom left is Aberdeen, Idaho. Thank goodness we don't have dark colored soils. It would have been a blackout. Weed suppression. You can write the front end of the check or the back end of the check. This is cotton from your brothers from another mother in Alabama. No herbicide cost because they're drilling into a 3 or 4 inch mat of cover crops that's been rolled. North Dakota, no cover crop on the left, cover crop on the right. Look at the guy on the right, saved a herbicide pass. All he's got to do is drill right into that. The plant on the field on the left is all green with weeds. They're both no-till systems, but he's going to have to use a herbicide, isn't he? The more specific your goals and concerns, the less diverse your mix will typically be. If your only resource concern is nitrogen fixation, boy, your mix is pretty simple. A pea and a vetch and you're done. But you only achieved one resource concern, right? The tighter your planting window, the fewer the species will work. So that's kind of another one of these September plantings. You're not going to probably have any or very few warm season species in there because you don't have the season. So the window's tighter. You can only use the cool season species on the cover crop periodic table. We've asked 100 questions to guys like Rick and Gabe and Jerry Doan and Dwayne Beck, Brendan Rocky. How long do you got to get that cover crop before you feel like you're getting a benefit? Sometimes these cover crops, and Rick showed them, right? Oh, that was an agronomic disaster, but it was a biological success under the ground, capturing that liquid carbon. 6 to 8 weeks some of these guys feel to get that rotational effect or to achieve most of the benefits. Four basic time frames to put a cover crop in. Early spring, and this is a big opportunity for us, especially if you can get your cover crop mix cheap. It planted in fallow ground. Fallow is a starvation methodology. Maybe you can plant a cover crop early in the spring before a corn or a pinto bean planting. You got that early spring window. These cool season species will germinate in pretty cool temperatures. Another one, number 2, is early summer, like after an oat hay harvest, right? End of June harvest. There's a whole window open there. Late summer is kind of a no-brainer where most people start after wheat harvest. There's an opportunity for lots of diversity right after wheat harvest. And then 4th is fall time, maybe a September or an October planting, depending on your situation. And because you can get cover crops to overwinter that can be growing, and you can terminate it before you plant corn or beans. Here's a little diagram for your specific crop. This is what you need to develop on your kitchen table. When am I going to put these cover crops in? Now, that's kind of here's a new one. Here's a new graph. There's your annual grain crop. Some of our guys in our nation are learning to plant green. So the cover crop's growing through the winter time. They're spraying it and planting it on the same day, or rolling it and planting it. There's your traditional on the bottom left, pre or post harvest. On the bottom right is interseeding opportunities. So there's lots of opportunities in our crop rotations where we can put these covers in. Termination methods, I'm not going to spend too much time on them because I don't know why you wouldn't turn it with a cow. It's pretty easy, or a sheep, or a chicken, or whatever. Just a comment here. I like this bottom one from Gabe. If grass finishing don't allow the grains to go to seed, it gets too mature, too much fiber. If it can't grow in the bin, when in doubt, seed it. I love that comment from Rick. He's no longer scared to plant cover crops in dry soil, is he? It's like, wow. But you got to build that soil ecosystem a little bit. You got to have the knight in shining armor on your side. Sometimes these cover crops, even in short seasons, Rexburg, Idaho, don't look very impressive because there's only 3 inches of top growth. It's like, wow, that's an agronomic disaster. But under the soil, it's got a 10-inch taproot busting that hard pan, right? A little more diversity. Diversity of root types. It's hard to improve soil health if there's no diversity of crop types. Here's one of my professional mentors, Grace, Idaho, short growing season. Son of a gun, I don't know where it gets closer or shorter than Grace. Oh well, 20 miles north into Soda Springs. Those guys are still working on it. Look at the warm season. So I think this was an 8-way mix or close to it. Can you see the Sudan grass or millets or corn browned out because it froze? Well, that's not the end of your growing season, is it, for a cover crop? Look at all the cool season species growing well into the late fall in that kind of a system. We're looking for diversity of roots in our systems. What's the matter with a 87-year wheat rotation? Wheat. You got the same root system, the same root type, right? You need to explore that diversity of root systems. Here's another comment that we're learning. Terminate while the cover crop is still vegetative if you're working in a moisture sensitive area, moisture limited area. Here's a similar graph that Rick showed, 24-1. That's kind of funny because when you talk to Gabe Brown, he says, that's nonsense, 24-1. His biological system is working so fast, 24-1 cover crop mix will be bare ground. But it's a place to start. 4 things to get right, the right species. I thought, oh no, how am I going to learn all these species for Idaho or Wyoming or Montana? Pretty soon when you go to enough of these workshops, you say, oh my gosh, the guy in Alabama is planting the same thing I'm planting in Idaho. The guy in North Dakota is planting the same thing I'm planting in Wyoming. These cover crops work all over the nation. Right seeding rates, right seeding time. Do you know your cover crop species? This started mind-boggling me when I started. Now, I was an agronomist by trade through the college, so I knew a lot of the cover crops. But I know it's a challenge out there. So Rick showed you, I don't think this is going to work, but Rick showed you this. If you can download this. No, we didn't get the. This is a free download. If you Google search ARS cover crop table, you can download this, and so you can click on flax or Phacelia, and it'll show you a picture of it, because you're probably like me, you weren't familiar with it. It'll list you 10 bullet statements, the pros and cons about each one of these cover crops. A good place to start. So we took it a little further because I live in Wyoming now, working with their agronomists. We've kind of developed a Wyoming cover crop periodic chart. Cool season species on the left, warm season species on the right. Cool season grasses, cool season kind of the Brassica family. In the middle there, Phacelia, flax, beets, pollinator plants. We didn't know where to put them. So in the periodic table, right, the chemists, they built their own little section for it. Cool season legumes, warm season legumes, warm season broadleafs, and a few of the warm season grasses. Probably the coolest thing I did in 2017 is went to greencoverseed.com in Bladen, Nebraska. They had 95 cover crops planted in single species, and then the last 5 plots were each employee made their own multi-species cover crop mix for the year. Boy, that was impressive. So in Idaho, some of the things we've done at the local level is tried to plant the periodic table in cover crop plots. That's where we learned about garbanzo beans and looked at flax and compared common vetch to hairy vetch. You'll never learn about cover crops going to a cover crop presentation. I'm sorry. You've got to see them, smell them, taste them. Where's Cameron? How many cover crops have we tasted? A few anyway, right? It's like, why won't those cattle eat those turnips when it's 100 degrees? Because they're pretty bitter, waiting for it to cool down and then the sugars return. Cool season grasses quickly. Warm season grasses. Cool season broadleafs, just to list a few. One of my personal favorites is impact forage collard. Really love that plant. Warm season broadleafs. Cool season legumes. Crimson clover, for example. We've always used Dixie crimson clover. Where's Dixie crimson clover from? Alabama. They say, oh man, Marlon, you should be trying some crimson clovers born and bred in Kentucky. A little more winter hardiness. Sun hemp, cowpeas, mung beans. I do get this occasionally. Marlon, the cover crop didn't work this year, all except the left-hand corner of the field where we ran out of herbicide. Probably a residual problem. read your herbicide labels carefully. Doesn't matter how carefully you read them, honestly, because there's not very much information. Herbicide companies haven't spent very much money saying what's the plant back residual for impact forage collard. I'm telling you, you won't find it. Or chickweed veg. Here's just a quick cover crop mix. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just an example. A cool season species on the left. It's got some. So I'm planting this early when the warm season ones will generally freeze out. Barley, oats, lentils, peas, clover, a radish, a rape, a turnip. On the right-hand side is a warm season mix. Has several warm season species in it, but it also contains some cool season species in it. Because when it freezes on September 5th, after August 1st planting after wheat, man, if it's all warm season, you're going to be done at the frost. But all those cool season species in the mix will continue growing. Some examples, the model I grew up on and learned is the North Dakota model, somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds of seed to the acre. If it's a dry land scenario, you can probably come down a little bit. If you're irrigated and want more forage, you can probably bump that rate a little bit. Based on your local knowledge and experience, right? There's nobody that can tell you better than doing a little homework on your own farm. Legumes are pretty expensive. That's kind of funny to me. Why are they so expensive? They should be dirt cheap. Maybe we need more guys growing these legumes for the cover crop industry. Here's a real life example. I think this is a Jerry Doan who spoke here several years ago. Here's his real life mix. Notice as the more diverse you get, everything kind of gets 1 pound to the acre. Do you see that? To start off with. And then you say, man, I need a little bit more legumes. I need a little bit more high biomass. So the easiest way when you make these mixes, get your 8-way mix or your 10-way mix, whatever, and just put a 1 in every column, 1 pound to the acre. It's that simple. And so you're going to be at 13 pounds to the acre. Now you just got to bump up some of your high carbon plants. Sudan grasses, oats, millets, etc., triticale. A slide from Gabe Brown. The soil health principles are universal. They are nature's principles. How you implement them in South Dakota, Casper, Wyoming, or Logan, Utah is unique. Each operation is unique, and their approach to cover crops may be and should be a little different. Here's some of your brothers from another mother. I'm on that one for some reason. These guys, these are Alabama, or no, these are South Carolina folks, North Carolina folks. Rolling the cover crop, 8-way cover crop mix. You can see a little yellow in it. The concept is they're learning to have photosynthesis 365. Feeding that soil biology through the liquid carbon pathway. You can't see no soil on these farms, can you? That's impressive, huh? A few years ago, some scientists said, oh, you can't plant green. Oh man, there's thousands and thousands of acres being planted green. St. Anthony, Idaho, the sand dunes. The farmer said, Marlon, we love your soil health principles, but we don't know how to make it. We don't know how to implement it. We're potato growers. Jaron, one of the young boys of the family, said, let's try this, man. We harvest our potatoes on September 5th. They planted the cover crop September 7th. 40 days later, they had 100% cover, vegetative cover. It was a spring planted grain, so winter killed, 35 mile an hour next spring. Ken's hair was a mess, Jeff. Mine stayed perfect the whole day. Wife couldn't even tell I'd been out in the wind. This was unique too. Was this the best example in the world? No, but they did something. And you could see across the field in St. Anthony, Idaho. which is impressive because normally you can't see across the field because of wind erosion. The first year they planted 1 pivot. How many pivots did they plant the second year in 2014? 9 pivots. There's the neighbor, 75 tons of average annual soil loss compared to 0 nearly. See, how can you have soil health if you have soil erosion? You're not building a system if you've got erosive soils that are leaving the farm. Brad McIntyre, he's spoken here also. I think I've showed you this slide. After wheat harvest in Boise, 13,000 pounds of above ground biomass drilled into winter wheat stubble. 300 head of halter broke cattle off the Oahe burned mountains. 300 head on 3 acres for 1 day, moved the fence. I joked with Brad's brothers that first year. I says, what did you guys do last year? We would have spent the whole fall disc ripping, cold pack and rolling. Now they jokingly said, now we wake up at 10 o'clock and go move a 1-wire fence. Here's some work from Jay Fuhrer on some cover crop feed values. We often say take half, leave half, because there's not very much nutrition in the bottom half of these covers. Can you see that? Hairy vetch, top half 14.75, bottom half 6.1. Radish, top half 105 relative feed value, bottom half 75. Where's the millet there? Millet, 9.7, the bottom half 1.7. Leave something there for the herd underground. The herd underground is working for you also. Look at the sweet clover, 228 relative feed value. And I know that's an old value, the relative feed value, but 228 compared to 97. Some farmers this is in Boise, planting a 6-way mix, July 25th, 105 degrees. Planted the cover crop mix. There it is, about September 15th. He called me up and says, what am I going to do? He didn't have a way to terminate this. I says, well, you can disc it twice, moldboard plow it, and cold pack it 3 times, and you'll be ready to go. He says, Marlon, I'm a regenerative soil health farmer. I was just pulling his chain, got a good reaction from him. So they sprayed the cover crop, drilled the fall triticale. That was his commodity crop he was going into. There's the cover crop burned down, triticale coming up. No tillage, 1 herbicide pass, and plant your commodity crop. This is what happens if you don't kill those little teeny half-inch tall weeds when you plant a cover crop. The triangle there is where the sprayer missed. Here's something kind of cool. This is just a video. So it's got crimper rollers in front of each planting unit. So no herbicide cost, planting the next commodity crop. Could be whatever. Kind of cool technology. This is what we're doing in Wyoming a little bit, working with producers. They've got 30-year-old smooth brome fields that on above average precip aren't yielding a ton to the acre. They say, Marlon, how do we fix this system, this long-term hay system? They've been hauling hay off these fields for 50 years, right, to the feed lot, to the feed yard. How do we fix it? It's 5 soil health principles, guys. So what they're doing is they're spraying out the old hay field when it's lush and actively growing, planting in a 10-way cover crop mix. Can you see the diversity there? And then grazing the cover instead of hauling it to the feed lot or to the stack yard. Gillette, Wyoming, terrible, terrible dry conditions this year. Cover crops sucked, really. But the cool thing was, it was a new knowledge event for the producers involved. We got to see it. You could see down the rows. You could identify the cover crops. Was there much grazing to this? No. So this particular producer, Jeff, he's kind of been on me like, Marlon, this is a disaster 2 years in a row. Or, you know, the third year doesn't look much better than the first year. So he says to me this fall we were out, he says, what am I going to do, Marlon? So I've been doing your cover crop program for 3 years. Some fields are a little better than the others. And I says, well, I guess you're going back into a multi-species hay crop system, right? So this ornery son of a gun farmer giving me rash for 3 years, he says, so I says, oh, you're going back to the hay system. He says, no, I will always have a multi-species cover crop in my system. It fits better than putting up hay. So this fall we were out there in Gillette and Sundance, Wyoming. 5 big producers told the same story. We will always have multi-species cover crops in our system to graze. That's pretty impressive. Now, every one of them are cattle operations, but before they were harvesting less than a ton to the acre of grass hay. There's a cover crop mix in Hewlett, Wyoming on the right-hand side. Cost $7 an acre, the farmer said. This is a dry scenario. So he's going into a drought. So he's not planting Marlon's Cadillac 30 pound to the acre mix, $30 an acre mix. So he's planting the Geo Metro version of the cover crop mix. Our producers in Wyoming bought off on the 5 principles of soil health from day one. There's their soil disturbance in the old sprayed out hay fields. Planting cover crops into them with disc drills. Wheatland, Wyoming, we have one producer there that we're working with, now has 1,000 acres of multi-species cover crop in his wheat fallow rotation. This is what we're trading, 3/4 of a ton of smooth brome hay. This is a 8-way cover crop mix in Sundance, Wyoming. It's a little video. I think I'll play part of it. Today we're in Sundance District Conservationist Keela Deaton and farmer Keith Heyer. They're just coming. So this was year 2. Last year was a disaster, but the farmer didn't quit. He kept at it, and that's what I love about working with these innovators. They're going to make it work. Look at the smile on that guy's face. The gal is a district conservationist. Yeah, Keith has, I'd have to guess, 300 acres now in his cropping rotation. So some of these guys are really trying to figure out how to cut the hay expense and make those 4-legged combine harvesters work. So Brad McIntyre's place, we did 165 earthworms. This one was at Keith's place too. Steak dinners for anybody that shows me 100 earthworms in a cubic foot of soil. Here we are on our hands and knees. This is kind of one of those humble moments when you are face to face with a producer. They're counting 37 earthworms in a cubic foot of soil. This is mid-September in Sundance, Wyoming. I said to the producer, man, you've got to feel in your heart that these soil health principles are working. So this is his 3rd year of no-till cover crop into hay stand, into an old hay stand, no harvest costs, just grazing it. Tell us a little bit about your earthworm count. Bailey Wrap in Wheatland, Wyoming. This is the 1,000 acres of cover crops in the wheat rotation. I'll push it there. There's Lander, Wyoming. So this guy took a beat-out, compacted pasture. The question is, man, my soil is so compacted, what do I do? This guy decided to hit it with a little chisel point, kind of open up that compaction a little bit, and then planted the cover crop mix. This was kind of cool. See the brown? The brown is the sunflowers, but the Sudan grass in the green hasn't froze yet. All right, I think me and Rick are going to be teaching a little, one of the breakout sessions so that we can answer questions. Any questions quick? Maybe I'll show you, no questions, here's Lander, Wyoming, just across. I forget the species, but I think it tells you in the video.
Seed mix made by Kevin Edinger, DC with NRC.
I think it was Sudan grass.
Cover crop.
Oh, it's going to show here.
Beat out old hay, grass field, sprayed it out, did one disking, and drilled in this multi-species cover crop. Sudan grass.
So this guy was ecstatic to see this much biomass compared to his beat-out pasture. Well, look, he's put the expense of a pivot on there, and he was getting no return.
Peas.
There's the mix. That was our first year mix with this guy. I tell these guys, they're a little edgy. That seems like a lot of species. I says, just have faith in the system, man. It's working. It's working around the globe. Okay, I guess we're done.